The arena. In the battlefield, there is stillness. In the arena, there is calm. For the fight is the art of the kill. Focus sharpens with breath. Breath hardens the will. The will you bear is important, above your weapons, swords and all. For with no will, the army will surely fall. It was an inscription above the arena, which used to be a fighting pit for gladiators and monsters alike. That was a long time ago. Long enough for even Petya to only barely remember his matches in the proving ground. He could still hear the chanting as a low echo in his ears, and he had the spear and claw scars to remind him even as the memories grew distant. Now, however, it is not a place for glory or honor. Now it is solely for blood sport. The war had been in full swing when Petya was a boy, but it was a distant thing. The Slava arena was located on the far shore, and was surrounded on all sides by the start of the Great Swamp. The city that sprung up around it was more of a shanty town than anything. It was rare that people chose to live there then. Now it was one of the most defensible places in Asondraeyl, and people of all sorts crowded together in its filth-covered streets. Even the upper districts would look like slums to an outsider in Slava. The familiar cobbled streets and well-organized roads to the rest of the country would seem like a daydream to a local with its stilted wooden walkways and maze-like corridors. The city began to run out of room to expand, as the deep swamp was too unreliable to build into, and the ocean spelled danger. So they built up. Bridges and tall stone and wood buildings, up to 5 stories high, were crafted haphazardly on top of the old. There was only one rule for the oft unreliable construction, and that was that nothing could stand taller than the arena. The phrase low district took on a whole new meaning, although it wasn't exactly safe to live in any structure except for the old top district, which was now nothing more than a glorified barracks for the reserve troops. This brought Petya back to thoughts of the arena. Fights still happened there. In fact, they ran even more frequently than when he was a fighter. However, now it was a proving ground for low-ranking soldiers, fighting against the captured or brainwashed slaves of Tempestane. The crowd of citizenry would cheer for the soldier heroes against the villainous enemy, while the recruiter generals would look out for peasant soldiers of particular talent to bring into the Navak rank units, bands to fight on the front lines that were talented, but still expendable. Fighting with spears and tridents had grown in popularity to fight opponents in the water, and any who could procure or make water-breathing amulets or potions were paid a great sum by many within the kingdom. Petya himself, however, was not here to recruit for the Navak. His purpose was far greater than that. The guards at the entrance of the Colosseum fumbled over themselves to greet him as he passed. An elf, who didn't look old, but who was likely centuries ahead of him, stared at him in awe. They probably remembered him from his time in the arena. 2 of them raced off to find some sort of sergeant to lead him through the tunnels, but he waved them off. He needed no guide. Instead, he followed the tunnels to a dimmer, less cared-for area of the cells. They used to be for holding monsters, but they had been repurposed to hold prisoners of all sorts. He observed the captive slaves as he walked. A tabaxi woman was chained into a dark cell. Solitary cells were rare down here, but she had one. He thought he remembered reading a report on her. Perhaps as long as 2 years ago. Gem of the mountain depths. She was a war priest of some kind to their goddess Tempest, and was lowly moaning. Petya wondered if she ever wondered why her goddess never came to save her. Why her power was not enough to stop her capture. Why it would not grant her a swift end. He wondered if she still prayed. It didn't seem so to him. Even a few months in solitary was usually enough to break people. It wasn't normally used on captured soldiers unless the kingdom needed information from them. However, Petya knew that there was no more for her to give. The report he had been given on her was her confession. Perhaps the jailers saw it as a fitting punishment for her disloyalty to her people. Perhaps they were just being needlessly cruel. He passed cells filled with a great many people, tabaxi, gnomes, triton, and even some of his own kingsmen. He felt especially terrible for the latter. Sometimes they were too late to rescue them, and whatever brainwashing they had been doing had taken root. It was very difficult to get them back to normal, and as such most captured were simply left to rot. He walked past them, even when one shouted, "Please, I am your kin! Please!" rattling the steel bars as he did so. He passed soldiers who had tried to flee, being tortured for their lack of loyalty or their lack of honor. They wouldn't be put to death unless they didn't learn from their stay at the arena. The kingdom does not accept disloyalty. Some of these soldiers would disappear right before they were released, sail downstream to the Red River cleaners if he had to bet. Finally, he came upon the last cell in the hall. It was dark and slightly damp, as it had been more recently dug. Iron and lead lined the walls and the bars. There was a dark line on the floor that smelled like blood, or storm, or both. In the cell was a small figure. A boy, Petya would place him at 16 or 17 despite his young features, kneeled at the center of the cell. His eyes were closed, and his hands were on his knees. He was muttering something in Ilnar. "Arc like lightning, sear through the rain. Let the storm protect you as you lance through its veins. Be not afraid like the crashing of thunder. Do not let the drums of war bring you under. Protect the storm as you roar for your plunder. Be the water and the dust, and do what you must, so that the light of the storm wins the day." He began to repeat the mantra as Petya coughed to catch his attention. The boy had hair like fire, so he expected his eyes to be green like most of the red-veined bloodline. Instead they were blue, like the flash of lightning from a storm witch's fingers, like the pale for the sky met the horizon but brighter. They glow in the dark of the cell. He came here to interrogate the boy, but he knows, looking at him, the most important question has been answered. This boy, this nameless human, found unconscious in the stormlight that borders ill. He was the new storm saint. "I am Petya," he began, joy racing through him. "Do you know what that means?" The boy shakes his head. He looks confused. Perhaps he didn't expect the Western barbarian to speak proper Ilnar. Perhaps it was simply the question that confused him. "It means rock in Ason." He said it heavily, implying its importance, and slightly sighing when the look of confusion did not disappear. "What do you call yourself?" He watched the boy's face scrunch up, considering if he could tell the man from the land that kept him in a cell anything. There was a scream from somewhere down the hall. The boy paled but set his jaw stubbornly and looked away. "If you do not wish to share a name, I shall give you one. How about—" He trailed off, pretending to think. "Ina." He watched with some satisfaction as the boy jerked back, as if struck. The smell of storm and blood grew stronger, but Petya was not afraid. This little storm saint may have not yet undertaken the ritual of remembrance, but all the saints knew their names. It was imprinted into their soul. "How do you know that name?" Lightning crackled around him, cutting black lines into the floor as it sparked in lazy circles. Petya sat on the floor, crossing his legs and letting his face show exactly how threatened he felt. "Ina is also a name from the language of Ason. It means strong water, like the rushing of a river, or the crashing, terrible rain of a storm." He smiled. "Do you know what the saints are, young one?" Confusion and anger were overtaken by faint recognition. He knows the term, but clearly doesn't remember where he heard it. "Saints are the gods of Asondraeyl, spirits of legends, and in Asondraeyl, legends are immortal." The boy saint's expression twists. Rejection first, then realization, but it does not land on acceptance. It settled on fury. I will never serve this bastard kingdom. It is not a choice, Petya responded with sadness, coloring his tone. Just as those drafted as soldiers must serve. A saint cannot refuse their duty. He paused, hardening his expression, and with it his heart. I am sure you would prefer the shrine maidens to the men that serve the arena. Another scream pierced through the air as if punctuating his point. The boy grows paler still, and even though Petya has been impressed with his loyalty so far, he was still just a boy. He will break. Whether it be through words or lack of them, even the most hardened of soldiers cannot resist the hands of the Muchatel or entities forbid an agent of the Blood Saint. He tried to push that reality to the boy, tried to make him understand as he had come to understand. What exactly would I be doing? He asks, an expression of cleverness appearing briefly, before he attempts to squash it with his faux fear. These saints have many responsibilities. Chief among them is advising the Korol and Koroleva, overseeing worship. And for you, making sure that there are no droughts and no flooding for crops. There are many, many other things that a saint must do, from overseeing and training new shrine maidens, to meeting with other saints. At the mention of advising the royal family, the boy's expression leaps from clever apprehension to joy back to reprehension. I am a stranger, and they'd give me that much trust? You are no stranger. You are Storm Saint Ina, who once walked the storms like a genie, who created the storm witches, who gave water to the kingdom in a drought. You are a red-veined, with eyes like the light of the sky, and I would guess more than some skill with a bow. You speak to the wind like it is your friend. You command lightning and thunder. You are a legend. You are a saint. The only ones who would dare challenge you are other legends. He squints his eyes and tilts his head. You are a saint as well? The Saint of Earth, Petya nodded. I am Earth Saint Petya. I have traveled back to the Slava Arena, my first home, with this form, to greet you. Before I knew, I was taken in by the last Storm Saint. I wish to repay the great many favors I owe you through this. The boy did not show a trace of confusion at the language of Ason. Yet another sign, not that Petya needed more. I am to train you as the previous Ina once trained me. At his words, the cell door opened slowly, though nothing touched it. However, first, I must give you your freedom. The boy took a shaky step forward. He could feel Petya's power as the earth around the cell molded together as soon as he stepped out of it and was turned back into earth, as if they had not dug to create the cell in the first place. And as the boy saint's new master led him from the halls, watching at the way the guards stepped aside to him, he knew that his plan had worked perfectly.